Let's call to order the regular board meeting, Monday, July 15th. We have convened at 7 o'clock in closed session. A quorum has been established. Mrs. Beckman is not able to join us tonight. Ready for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we'll start tonight with the approval of the board minutes from the business meeting of June 17th. Is there a motion?
Move that we accept the minutes.
Yeah, second.
Okay, Mike Davenport moves, Terry Pavasich seconds. Joanne?
Mike Davenport.
Aye.
Terry Pavasich.
Aye.
Rick Pavanato.
Aye.
Deb Boyle.
Aye.
Keith Mattoon.
Aye.
Nancy Kupka.
Aye. Motion carries. We have approval, okay, sorry. We're ready for our first reception of visitors. This is for any visitor to bring about any agenda item on which the board will vote tonight. There will be another opportunity to address the board on any item later on this evening. Do we have anybody who'd like to wish to come forward? Hearing none, we'll move on to the recommendations and reports of the superintendent. Mark?
Thank you, Dr. Kupka. The first report is a State of the District report, and I would like to give some background information about the report. When the board adopted new policies several years ago, one of the policies was to establish annual goals. And not only to establish them, but to report about those goals quarterly, and then in July to have a State of the District report, in which case the administration would report to the board and community about its progress on the district's goals during the year. So this is now an annual process. It's been going on for, I think this is the fourth State of the District report. And the purpose of this report is to report about the district goals, which are derived from the strategic plan. I will state for the record that we will not tonight include what we consider to be our key student achievement data at this meeting. The reason we will not is because we don't have it yet. And as it's occurred over the years, sometimes we do receive it early, but often we do not receive it until the end of the summer. Ergo, we'll have a separate report early in the school year about achievement data, including the Prairie State Achievement Exam, the ACT, the IPASS series, and also our progress on with students taking advanced placement courses. Those are things that we've identified as key indicators of academic achievement for the district. Yeah, it is not my intent or our intent tonight to review every portion of the State of the District report. We would be here a long time tonight. And furthermore, throughout the year, we've had reports about different aspects of district goals, so the board is apprised about our work, and because it keeps our work in the forefront. And one of the purposes of the strategic plan and the goals is to engage all facets of the district. It's not just academics, it's not just facilities, it's not just budget, it's not personnel, it's all those things. Ergo, each of us has a role in some way, shape, or form in leading and developing agendas toward those purposes. So what I'd like to do tonight is to present to the board several brief reports about things we haven't really covered over the past year. Those include data, those include the work of a number of people, and of course we have some new people presenting the reports, but that's fine. We like to put them under pressure early. Finally, Nancy has asked me to make a brief report about those goals that we are struggling to address, have not addressed, have roadblocks about, and why, and I'm prepared to do that. So, Ms. Sicardi, are you first up?
I am.
All right. I'll turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Gina Zaccardi.
Thanks, Fred. Okay, so tonight I will report on the progress monitoring tool as well as diagnostic tool that we use for the past 3 years with students in terms of reading. We adopted, as I said, 3 years ago, the Scantron Performance Series reading test. And this reading test really does 4 things for us. It is one of the indicators that we use for placement. In other words, what courses should students be in? We use it for differentiated instruction. What's really exciting about that is that Mr. Rousseau was able to make all those scores available to all of our teachers. So teachers can go in, look at students' progress, look at where they're at, and put students into differentiated reading groups and give differentiated readings to students as well. We also use it for progress monitoring, which I'm going to speak about tonight, and that is monitoring the progress of our students from really the fall to the spring each year, and now we have 2 years of data. And the next year, we're hoping to test our juniors, so we will have 3 years of data. And then also tonight, I'll talk a little bit about how we use it as a diagnostic assessment. And what I mean by that is that when we place students in direct reading instruction classes, they really hone in on those areas that students need to work on so that students can progress beyond the expectation. And this test, this Scantron Performance Series test, is used in many schools across the nation. So we have national data to support where our students should be and how our students should be growing. So with that, as I said, we'll start with progress monitoring. This first chart shows freshman students, both our freshmen from just last year and the year before, so 2 years of data on our freshman students. And we're looking at what are called scaled scores. Scaled scores, as the Performance Series defines them, are basically independent of grade level. They're scores that are designed for the measurement of progress from one point to another, true growth. And our students on the average began at 3,103 scaled score points, which puts them directly in the 51st to 75th quartile. There's 4 quartiles, and they're the third. Okay? Students in that quartile should grow on the average of 16.53 points. Our students, as you can see, went far beyond that growth. They went to 3138, which means that in District 99, our freshmen are growing by over 34 points, nearly double the expectation. The second chart talks about sophomore students. This is a smaller group because this is the first year, 12-13 was the first year that we tested our sophomores. And sophomores are normed nationally as well. So their rate of growth is expected to be a little bit different. Our students on the average began at 3184, also in the 51st to 75th percentile, and they were expected to grow 21.2 points, which would be 3207. Our students exceeded that, growing at just over 44 scaled score points, almost double the expectation. This is 2 years of progress monitoring. And remember, we're looking at all students. These are not students in the direct instruction classes, but it does include those students as well. So we're looking at all students. And when we look at 2 years, we're talking about those students who took the test freshman year and then took it again sophomore year. And we test them, of course, in quarter 1 and quarter 4. And you can see in each case, we were far above the expected growth. Our students, of course, began freshman year in that 51st to 75th percentile, exceeded by growing 71 points instead of the 16 that they should have. Started out sophomore year higher than the expectation at 3141. Again, expected to grow approximately 20 points and exceeded that as well. Their 2 years growth was 105 scaled score points, thereby exceeding the 39 points expected. Our students are growing at more than twice the amount other students are growing nationally. And to me, that speaks of several things. One, it speaks of our school-wide approach to literacy coaching, because it truly is embedded across the curriculum. It's not necessarily in one class, but all classes. And we see that we see it in the scores. And especially when you consider this includes, and these next couple of slides are going to be students that are in direct reading instruction classes, we call strategies for academic success. Those numbers are included. I didn't exclude them. So I didn't take out the lowest readers. That's all students. The next couple of slides are the students that are in these reading classes. Okay? As you know from previous course proposals, we have tiered reading instruction in District 99. Our lowest readers come into Read 180. You've heard presentations before about Read 180, so I'm not going to focus on that group of students. The next tier is what we call Strategies for Academic Success, and that's predominantly a freshman class. Those students came in right there at 2895, which put them in the second percentile. Unlike the other groups that were in the third, this is in the second, so they're in the 26th to 50th. And at that rate, because their reading scale score is a little bit lower, they're expected to grow more. In the first year, they're expected to grow to 2918, which of course would be about 23 scale score points, and our students after 1 year of instruction grew to 2963. Again, a couple of reasons for that growth: the diagnostic nature of the way in which the course is taught, but I would also argue the fact that literacy strategies are embedded across the curriculum. This next group, which is really, to me, the most exciting of all of these groups, looks at the students that are in these tiered reading classes. The students who's freshmen who took the year-long course, and then as sophomores came into the Advanced Strategies for Academic Success course. So it's a smaller group of students because not all students matriculate into that Advanced Strategies. Some students after 1 year no longer need reading support. Okay? So these students came in on the average at 2843, which actually put them in the lowest percentile, from basically the 1st to 25th national percentile quartile. The expectation for students in that percentile is 89 points, so they should have gone to 2932, and you can see that our students exceeded it and went to 2966. The next year, sophomores, they lost a little bit, came in actually a little bit lower than where they had originally started out, but look at the incredible gain, ending at 2976. In 2 years, the expectation was that they would grow 105 scale score points. Instead, they gained 132. But what's significant here is they came in that lowest quartile, that 1st to 25th, and they came out in the next quartile from the 26th to 50th.
About how many students are represented?
In our advanced strategies, the students that have taken both, we're looking at probably around 50 students. It depends every year, and I only took students that I had all 4 scores for. Okay? Because otherwise, if a student left, or it wouldn't be accurate data.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's great. We also have an advanced strategy course for juniors, by the way, but I didn't look at their data because we're not testing all the juniors yet. It won't be until next year that we'll have that data. So in summary, I think the data suggests several things. One, that our students are growing beyond the national percentile when compared to other students nationwide. And that's across the board, but it's also reflected in our direct instruction classes as well. And I think the fact that our teachers are able in these direct instruction classes to hone in on the areas that the students really need work on is showing in this growth. Any
Questions from
questions
the
about the data?
Do you know why do we have that drop, though?
That's pretty much to be expected because of summer.
So, okay.
Even though we do have summer reading programs, as you know, when you look at the data, and the interesting thing about performance series is I actually went back and tried to find out what they would suggest that the drop should be, and they don't give an estimate. They only give where students should be within 1 year as separate years, not across the continuum. So I can't identify what the correct amount of loss could be. I think what's important is that we gain it back, and we gained it back quickly, because I even looked at some students that we tested in Q2, and they had already gained it back. So it wasn't taking till Q4 to grow it back, it was happening early in. What I think is also important, and I've thought a lot about this, is that we need to look at this multiple years. If our students continue to drop, we have more than one data point, then we need to think about what do we need to do to ensure that doesn't happen. And we had a,
I'm sorry. I was thinking that maybe that dropped too, just because we're not really talking about that many kids. It looks significant
It's not huge.
when you first look at it, right? Like we're dropping more than what would be like an average drop, but we're talking about such a small amount of kids that a couple of kids could really make that.
and I was just going to say,
Right.
we had a couple of kids, we had one student specifically that dropped by 100 points, which alarmed me. But then in conversations, and we've had conversations as well with the company Scantron, this is a computer-adapted test, and it is designed to basically kick you out if you're not taking it seriously. And while it will do that, if a passage should take 30 seconds to read, a kid's just sitting there clicking C the entire time, it can't necessarily detect it every time. So it could be one or two students who didn't take the test seriously that could lead to that drop. I think what's also interesting when you think about that drop is, and I'd have to go back a few screens, I can if you'd like me to, is when we look at all students, we didn't see any loss. In fact, we saw a summer gain. It was slight, but we saw a summer gain. And that was one of the reasons why I made it to the point to say that I had those direct instruction reading students in that average. So it wasn't just because they were
Right.
not in the reading programs, but. yeah.
Are you finding the ones that are doing the summer reading program, are they not dropping, or is
Well,
that,
all of our students are required to do the summer reading.
well?
It's hard to say which students do it wholeheartedly,
Right.
and it's hard for us to evaluate that because the projects that teachers do with students from the summer reading project are different. So to say this student, let's say if we used grades, received an A and this student did not, it's a different project, so I'm not sure it's a fair assessment.
Oh,
It might be interesting over time, though, not just to look at the data, but to survey students, to find out. Maybe even anonymously study groups of students to find out. But we already have a summer bridge program for our incoming freshmen, where we focus on a lot of these skills. But as we continue, this will help us hone in on what skills we need to focus on as well, and to continue.
Yeah, yeah. Because a lot of times if nobody's looking over their shoulder.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I just think this is great, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more data points in the future, and I think it's a very simple, elegant way to tell a great story, so congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Tice is next.
Next, we wanted to give the board an update on the work that we're doing this summer in the area of appraisal. There's really two different sections where work is being done. One is the Danielson framework that we use in our evaluation of our teachers, and then we are starting work on a department share rubric. We have not had one of these for quite some time in District 99. So to begin with, I'm just going to give you as a demonstration of the kind of work that we're doing. This is a shot here of one component of one of the 4 domains in the Danielson framework. And my purpose in showing you this is that you get a chance to see kind of the way the sentences are put together, the way it doesn't necessarily flow well horizontally to the eye for the teacher, department chair, designated administrator charged with using this document to help make determinations of the teacher's abilities that ultimately end up in a rating as a part of the summative document. And one of the things that we heard from our staff through surveys that were done towards the end of the year, meetings that were held with the leadership teams of both campuses, is can we make this a little more user-friendly without changing the actual intent that Charlotte Danielson put into the frameworks. So we've got a group of people that are working together this summer, and to give you an example, again, one component, this exact same component, some of the things that we're looking to do is to separate out the long phrases that Danielson uses that are separated by commas and made them individual bullet points, because one of our challenges when we're doing an observation is if you see part of a sentence that's separated by a comma from 3 other ideas that may not really have much in common with that first part, do I highlight the whole sentence? Do I ignore it? How many parts of the sentence do you use to say, I'm highlighting this? And so we thought if we made it a separate bullet point and made it flow nice horizontally across the screen, it's very easy for the teacher as well as the evaluator to make a determination, is this first idea something that I saw or didn't see in my observation? And then there were some things like, you see here in the bottom yellow, where we've added in some of the boxes, pedagogical approach is suitable to student learning of the content, because it was referenced in the first box and then not repeated in that same format all the way across. So it again, makes it a little bit easier for us to understand as we're making some determinations. And then we added things like accurate there in yellow in the distinguished box that we felt better captured what we're looking for in a distinguished teacher. But the rest of the language is the same. We've just put it into a different format. And so the next slide, I put them in comparison side by side. So you're still seeing the same component, 1A, the Danielson proficient descriptors on the left, followed by our suggested draft right now of the proficient and what that would look like for us. And then you see the Danielson distinguished with our distinguished next to it. And we just feel like it's easier to read, easier to understand, and will help make the process be a little more smooth as we work with our teachers and helping everybody understand which of the 4 categories that they fall in. So that's the work that we're doing on the teacher side of things. The department chairs have asked for a system that would allow us to provide feedback to them. We have several department chairs who don't teach any classes. We have quite a few who may teach 1 period, but then are a department chair for 4. Then we have some who teach 2 and a department chair for 3, etc. And so simply giving them feedback based on the teacher evaluation tool didn't really seem a fair representation of the work that they're doing for us in District 99. So we wanted to come up with a way to give them feedback for both hats, both roles that they play, if they're split. If you're somebody who only teach, or somebody who doesn't do any teaching, you only are a department chair, this would be the rubric we would use with them. And then if you're split, there will still be observations of them as a classroom teacher, and then this would allow us to provide feedback in the role that they serve as a department chair. And so we formed a committee to work on this summer. We are in the process right now. We had, through Gina's help, solicited other schools that are in the CADCA and the NWPA organizations to see what models they were using, if any. And so we gathered that from various districts. Then in talking with our legal people, they said we really need to make sure that we don't stray far from the way Danielson established the framework for teaching. And so we thought, well, let's see what happens if we substitute department chair for teacher and staff for student and all of the framework components that she's created. What does that look like? And so tomorrow we meet again as a committee, and we've had 2 groups of people that each worked on 2 different domains, and we'll be putting that together and comparing it to the other districts' rubrics to see how does that look, which do we like better, are we going to steal something from one district, go with what we've done in terms of the substituting of the language in another component, and just try to meld the systems that we have together to make the best department chair rubric that we can. And it's our goal to have this in place for the start of the 13-14 school year.
Once you put it into place, how are you going to evaluate the rubric? How will you evaluate the rubric once you have it in place?
Well, the language for the department chair would lend itself to the same kind of evaluative determination to be made by a designated administrator as the teacher document does for a department chair that goes into the classroom or the designated administrator. The language itself would say, it might talk about, instead of planning for a lesson, maybe now it's going to be planning for department meetings, cross-town meetings, etc. So it would still be planning, but it's just a different kind of planning that you do as a department chair. The use of resources is going to look different for a department chair than it does a classroom teacher. So there'll be more informal, formal observations that will probably need to be conducted by a designated administrator. But those are still things that we haven't yet, gotten to. We're right now working on the language of what the rubric would look like before we start then talking about the implementation of that rubric. But we're hoping that that language really, kind of speaks to itself of how we would go about evaluating the department chair. And why we have department chairs helping to create this, so that it's not done to them. This is all part of, something that they have contributed thought to in this process.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Mr. Rousseau?
Switch this off here, Mark. Right. Thank you very much. Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge the work of others in this plan that we've developed, Gina being one of them, actually. We have a committee of about 10 people that worked on this. Understanding the instructional connections are very important. Sorry for the late delivery of this to board docs. Mark and I have crossed paths over the past few weeks, and just
Not
this
very
morning. Right, we haven't crossed paths, so. As you know, our goal last year, one of our goals in the technology area, was to develop a comprehensive plan that articulates our vision for technology. Over the past few years, we've looked at the net standards, 21st century classroom, what those things mean to us. And we spent as a group, the beginning of this year, a lot of time just looking at what are our core mission, our core goal areas, if you will, in technology. And no matter which way we turned, it all kind of pointed back to this idea of full-time access to digital resources and materials. We're not alone in that. Many school districts, every school district has the ideas of one-to-one computing or bring your own device computing, depending on how you phrase it. Basically, that idea of every student, every teacher having a device and that kind of access. We could have went with what I call a ready, fire, aim approach, which was come to you now with a plan to start buying devices or moving in that direction. A couple reasons we didn't. One, I think our district culture and process is such that we do process things and we look at things very carefully. Another reason is, and I quoted an article, actually 2 sentences from a several-page article that was done by a nationally recognized instructional technology leader on the whole one-to-one computing movement. I just would like to read those 2 sentences to you because they really say so much about how we feel about this and what kind of led to some of our decisions. One says, without question, I believe every student must have 24/7 access to the internet. I think everybody could agree. All of us seem to thrive on that every day, so we all need that. The second one, though, is very important. It says, adding a digital device to the classroom without a fundamental change in the culture of teaching and learning will not lead to significant improvement. So it basically really emphasizes that idea of devices themselves do give us access to this wealth of information and tools and resources, but without a focus on what are we going to do with them and how is it going to make a difference, those are some key elements that we really need to consider. We've done some work to preface this. We've done an infrastructure upgrade a number of years ago. We're in good shape with that. Our wireless network is up and operational. Teachers have tablet computers. So our goal that we've set forth for ourselves for this year, we've got a lot of work to do. And we are enveloping that work in the development of a roadmap for where do we need to go with this. There's actually 4 key areas that we've outlined of areas that we really need to look at. First and foremost being curriculum, instruction, and assessment. We really need to answer those questions about what are our curricular strategies, our instructional strategies, how available are digital resources, how do those integrate? Those kind of questions kind of help answer the how and the what are we going to do with this access. Professional development goes hand in hand with that. We can't have anything be a really successful unless we develop our staff accordingly. And two areas actually within that. One is development of, as we identify what those instructional strategies are, professional development on those themselves, and then secondarily, development on the actual technology, the mobile technology and the tools that go along with that. And then, surprisingly or not, the third thing on the list, so there's two before that, the third thing on the list is technology. And there it's a myriad of things. The first and foremost being exploring what types of device would we standardize on or allow. And instructional strategies and usages, digital materials will all play a big part in that in terms of what these devices need to support. We'll need to look at our support, at our policies, take another look at our infrastructure. We'll also have to look at if our expectation is that every student in a classroom has access to this device and they have access 24 hours a day, what do we do to help our families that might not have internet access? So that would be a real consideration also. And finally, our last area we just call stakeholder involvement, or I would call communication, really. We certainly need to solicit tons of input from our teachers, our students, parents, our staff. We need to connect with all of our feeder districts. A number of our feeder districts are down this path in varying degrees, and we need to connect with all of them and articulate with them as much as we can. Other school districts are in various paths locally and around the country, some having great success, others perhaps not. We need to learn from those experiences and not reinvent the wheel. And then finally, there's other technology professionals out there that we'll need to work with as well. That's a quick summary of the plan. Mark asked me to be brief. What questions can I answer for you?
Rod, when you look at your budget on the last page, and you're looking at the bulk of what you're asking for coming from technology deployment, could you be a little more specific in what you're asking for in that line item?
Sure. What that really is that primarily we're looking at funding some purchases for pilot devices. That's probably the biggest expense in what we're looking to do next year is, as we're identifying what devices would work for us, part of that we'll have to be piloting those devices. So we wanted to make sure we earmark some money for those purchases.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Folliger.
Thank you, Dr. McDonald. On the facility maintenance plan, a goal that's been a year's worth of work now. We've worked with White & Company since last July. The purpose of the plan was to develop a document that provides information and data to manage long-term and short-term maintenance. So we did some audits at the 3 facilities. All that information was gathered. And once we decided on our program for, which is computer-based or software for School Dude, Planning Direct, we're now inputting that information into the software. The plan provides energy conservation ideas, life safety ideas, and environmental issues if there are any in the buildings. All of the items are being identified and inputted, but we are putting risk values to them, we're putting life cycles to them, and we're putting cost estimates to them also. So a lot of detail, a lot of information going in. We're excited. Ultimately, this will be used for numerous reasons. I'll be using it all the time, but as we develop our capital plan each year, it's going to be a useful tool for me to go to and see what's due up in the buildings to what we have currently and fixing what we have. Also, we've added a couple things, one-line diagrams for our plumbing, electrical, and HVAC in the buildings. Very important, especially our staff that's in the field, a mechanical person, a maintenance individual out in the building can easily pull up a one-line diagram from electrical to go back to the panel or see where it's coming from, emergency situations, so useful information that we'll be able to give back to some of our staff. Last but not least, our plans, our electronic filing system for our plans for all of our facilities will now be brought up via electronically, which is exciting. So we can, if you're out in the field, you could pull up any part of the building and see what's happening, if you need to get to another sector of the building. So it'll be right there at your hand. So an individual that's out in the field could pull that up on a computer or a laptop or an iPad, and they'll be able to access a lot of information. And good to have that in the school district. Also, we'll incorporate this with the master facility plan as we integrate the two together, and we'll talk about that more as we go into more goals. Are we going to talk about that tonight, Dr. McDonald?
We will not talk about that tonight.
Okay. Questions I can answer from the facility maintenance plan?
Okay, and I'll cover these briefly because this report has already been about 30 minutes. I find, I believe, 6 goal areas where we have not accomplished what we hoped to, or we're lagging behind where we wanted to be. And in several cases, that's due to changes in leadership and new people coming in, old people exiting in the middle, and that just happens. In a couple of cases, it's due to the fact that we were struggling to find effective quantitative measures. Mrs. Accardi presented earlier some very effective quantitative data to evaluate the reading program. The problem we've only had that recently. And for example, one of the first areas that I think we're lagging behind, we made a commitment to evaluate our literacy staff development, because as we learned when we did the audit a couple years ago, we have strong programs at both schools, but they're different programs at both schools. So our interest was in trying to find out quantitatively which is the most effective, and then to share the most effective features of each. I think we've established that we have different programs that are both effective, but we have not established a quantitative analysis yet, which is something that we will do this coming year. Similarly, we made a commitment to audit the co-teaching model, where we have regular ed and special education teachers in the same classroom with a mixed group of kids. And we have a lot of anecdotal evidence that suggests that's successful, but we really don't have a lot of quantitative. And that has been a goal now for a year and a half. We're finding it very difficult to develop a model to do that. And we had some support from Northern Illinois University, but their grant ended and that support ended. And so now now we have to rethink how we might do this, because that is very expensive to put 2 teachers in the classroom. If it's good for kids, we want to do it. We want to make sure that's the case, beyond just the anecdotal evidence that we think is there. As the board is aware, we did quite a bit of work on the master site plan over the last several years. We accomplished more than we initially anticipated, given the money we were prepared to spend. That said, we had about $2 million left, and all of a sudden we had the issue of the transition program not being able to be at Westmont School, and so we took the remaining money and made a commitment for most of it to develop a new facility. However, that does mean that we have projects identified from that master site plan that are undone. The simple answer is that now goes to the master facility plan, and those will be considered as part of that, but the reality is we have not accomplished that. As that one of our goals was to do that, but our resource limitations prevent us from doing that. You have a report about minority recruiting. That's been a push of ours for the last couple of years. We are disappointed. We only hired, at least to this point, one new minority staff member. We did not have interview as many minority staff members as we have in the past. Again, that's a transition of leadership issue. I am very pleased that Pete has made inroads with Chicago State University to have student teachers come to us. And so we will have student teachers from that institution going forward, and that could be a source of minority applicants. But I think, frankly, we have to continue to work on this. If we're going to be serious about adding more diversity to our faculty, we have to push that every year. We're all aware of that. There's a goal in the plan 4.3B, which was about working with local universities to develop certification programs or perhaps master's degrees in the subject matter, and frankly, we haven't addressed that at all. So when we meet in a couple weeks to begin preparing the goals for 2013, 2014, we're going to vet that to determine if that's something we really want to do. If we do have to have enough interest among our faculty that they will take the courses, we do have to make connections with a university that's willing to provide that training. But it's beyond the master's degree. It's also ESL training. It's also some reading certifications. And so there certainly is merit to that, but that's something we just have not addressed. And finally, and again, Mrs. Accardi made an excellent presentation tonight. It has been the goal for 4 years and many different people involved to collect data sets on all of our interventions that we use, because again, we spend a lot of money on them. We're doing that to support kids. We think they are good, but we don't have quantitative proof they're good. Frankly, if we develop or collect this information, we find out that they're not worth the money we spend on them and something else might be, then we would probably shift our expenditure to a different program, which is the point of doing that kind of analysis. But as we are behind in that, because we just have not developed that sort of coordination among the schools, coordination of the data, and a statistical analysis methodology that we use consistently. So those are basically the areas of the school goals that we are not as far along as we hope to be.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions or comments?
I'll just say that when we had adopted all these tasks, I seem to recall us talking about it being a very lengthy and challenging list of things that need to get done, and it was hoped that we would be able to address them all, but it's not surprising that there'd be a few that we're still working on a little bit, so in your defense.
Thanks.
Well, but I guess I asked Mark to share this with us not because I wanted to put him on the hot seat or because I think that there's a finger to point here. I mean, this is just, the strategic plan is a huge plan, and we do have lofty goals, and so sometimes it helps to put something front and center to talk about why we haven't gotten there or haven't had difficulties. And I would go so far as to argue that although we all feel much more comfortable with quantitative data, sometimes there just is not quantitative data to have, and anecdotal is all that we do have. So while we should always strive for quantitative data, sometimes qualitative is enough and we just go forward with it. So I don't think we should feel constrained by that necessarily.
Well said.
Thank you. Anything else? Any other comments? Thank you for your bravery.
You're welcome. The State of the District report is concluded for 2013, Dr. Kupka.
Phew.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I, for one, would just like to say thank you to everybody, because it's one thing to come in here and talk for 5 minutes about work you've done for a whole year, but we all recognize this work you've done for a whole year plus. So thank you very much.
Very good.
And moving right along, the end of your financial report.
Very well, Mr. Stehlen.
Actually, I'd like to talk for about 45 minutes to an hour about what I've done in the last few weeks. But,
And so here's the challenge, and here's the
Mark
challenge.
doesn't let me do that, and
5
you
minutes.
wouldn't like that either. The end of the year report, I just have that up there for members of the audience so they have something, a visual to see. I'm just going to touch on the highlights of the narrative that accompanied the exhibits. Most importantly, this is just a monitoring tool. It's a cash basis snapshot. We make adjustments for early taxes, so we catch 80% of our revenues perfectly that way. We know exactly where we are with taxes. There's going to be accrual entries that are made when we prepare ourselves for the comprehensive annual financial report that occur over the summer, actually, when we analyze these accounts. And so I don't get too excited either way. I'm disappointed that overall our fund balance has dropped, at least at this point in time, in this snapshot, more than we had anticipated, but the variances are pretty small. And I think we've been able to transfer the information we learned from this year-end report into our budget development, which I'll talk about in a minute or two, our tentative budget, and we still are balanced at that point. So nothing too alarming here, but I do want to highlight a couple of things. Our total budgeted revenues were $80,240,000. We came in about $191,000, or about 0.25% short of that. I did in the quarterly report for March point out the interest income still is flat, and not that we over budgeted there, but some of the collection of our interest will come in the summer after this year end. We have tax anticipation warrants and some other smaller investments that are out a little bit longer than June 30th, and we don't collect it until they mature. That'll bring that number up, but it won't bring it up to 100%. It really is falling short. And so we've made another reduction in our interest income in our tentative budget, as you'll see as we talk about that in a few minutes. Overall, a couple key things on the revenue side, and maybe I'll have you flip to the next one, which is a revenue section. I already mentioned that the interest income. Food services are down again, and there's an interrelated change here, or just I guess a growing condition that we have, and that we have another 6% growth in free and reduced students. And that impacts the food service collection because we aren't charging those individuals. We are getting some state funding for them, and you'll see that some of the state aid is up because of that. We do collect and get reimbursed by the state for those individuals, but it does also bring our registration fees down, because individuals and students that are eligible for free and reduced lunches are not required to pay fees. It's up by policy and also state law. So we don't collect fees for those individuals for any curriculum-related courses, or anything related to the curriculum. Field trip, if it's a required field trip, which I don't think there are many of those, but if it's a required thing, we don't charge them for it. So there's some down revenue on that local area there as well, tied to that. It's now about 27% of our kids are eligible for free and reduced. In the middle of the year, and I think I pointed this out in March as well, there was a automation, I guess, epiphany by the State Board of Education, in that they started dropping lists from other state data sources of all of the Medicaid eligible students, and those are also required to be free and reduced eligible. And so that actually took away in some ways about $60,000 of registration fees, because we had parents that had already paid for their students, and they didn't ask to be waived for their fees, but the state required us to put them in the system for our food service program, and so therefore we just refunded the fees to them. And so that was a hit of $60,000 just from that one change this year. So that's really why our numbers are up. It could very well be that our numbers were always higher than claimed by parents, because so many parents, even though they technically might be eligible, they might not come in and ask for that waiver, or might not sign up for free and reduced. And it could be that the state dropping those numbers on us basically brought us up to where we've always been. It could always have been a 5 or 6% hidden number in our true balances. If we slip maybe to the expenditure side, just a few key things, and really our supply budget is overexpended by 3%. We kept our heat on an extra month this year because normally we switch over April 15th. it was still chilly. And so we kept the heat going for another month, and that kind of drove our costs up on the natural gas. It's an unusual thing. I'd say 9 out of 10 years, we are able to switch over at April 15th. So it's pretty unusual. That drove that up a little bit. And also with the transportation, we had another, I think, action that really was a function of the economy right now. We doubled the number of homeless students that we have eligible for our district. And it's went from 20 to 40, but that's a pretty big change for us. I mean, if we go back 5 years, I think we had 4 or 5. It was a non-issue for us. State law requires us to transport those students. If they, let's say, a homeless student doesn't have to be living on the street. They could be living with a relative out of our district, with a sister or an aunt or an uncle, and they're still technically homeless because they don't have their own permanent home. And so we are required to transport them, and we had been using taxis because it was such an erratic population. Might be for 3 weeks, might be for the rest of the year, might be, so you don't really set up a permanent thing usually. And we would be transporting them in. And so our costs, the gross costs were about $180,000, $190,000 for those students this year. It was a very expensive thing to do. When the student lives out of our district, we do recover half of that from the district that they're residing in on a temporary basis. And so we've billed those districts. Most of the other local schools in the area have paid us their half. And actually, believe it or not, Chicago, City of Chicago is where a good number of them are living. And they pay us. So City of Chicago, for the big system they follow the rules and they pay us, but it's a little slower in coming. So we have some money coming back. But our net cost went from about $80,000 last year to $180,000 this year. So big jump there in the transportation costs. And we also had a good number of special needs students requiring some larger costs this year and larger transportation needs. To address that, we actually have made a change in our provisions for the carrier for this. It's been very common for most schools just to use taxis for these erratic onesie, twosie type trips in and out of the district, either for homeless or for some special needs students. You might have a behavior disorder student that may be attending a school away from here. The only way that this child might really make it to school every day is if he's got a car waiting for him at the end of the driveway, and we've been accommodating that. The change that we've made really is that we're not going to change our process. We're still going to provide those services as needed for our students, but we have consolidated them behind one vendor. Westway, who's our regular daily transportation, has started a service a couple years ago where they will pick up the students, and it's through SUVs and different transports. We would rather use them than use taxi cabs. It's not necessarily going to save us a lot of money. It might save us a few %, but they have a much higher level of liability. They have cameras in and outside of the vehicle, and they have GPS tracking. And so they're just, they give us a higher level of comfort, and we also gives us one point of contact for our building to go to, rather than, it's been taking 3 or 4 different taxi cab companies to accommodate the number of students we have. So that's a change we've made going forward for the special transportation. And with that, I really don't have anything more on the quarterly to highlight. I'd like to move right into the budget because they're so interrelated. And if I appreciate Rod being my wingman here for the technology tonight.
Before you move on, were there any questions?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, sorry.
Thank you. The tentative budget, big highlight here, it's balanced again. I actually did think we would have a small surplus this year, but some of the overages that we had from last quarter and last year, I'm kind of bringing those over this year to give ourselves a little more room so that we don't have as hopefully not a negative surprise at the end of the year like we just did with the quarterly. Another positive is, I guess, I'm being very, very self-focused here. The state hasn't resolved their pension crisis by forcing down a loss in revenue or throwing an additional expenditure on us. And so the positive thing for us, even though that hurts us as a state, we have no resolution to that, is that we can still continue to use a significant amount of our budget that we've kind of carved out, waiting for that shoe to fall, to reduce our long-term debt. And we also increased a little bit on the capital outlay this year. Those are the two main things that we've been doing to get ourselves ready and in the strongest position possible for whenever this pension piece does filter its way down to the schools. The increasing our capital outlay takes care of some larger projects for us, gets us ready so that if we have to put off a few for a year or so, we won't have any real critical things. And we've never really had too many critical things in the last decade thrown at us. I think our plumbing last year was one thing that we decided was better not to take a risk with. But it just gets us in a better position. And we're paying down really 20% of our long-term debt is being paid for out of operations right now, which is it's very few schools pay anything out of their operating funds for it. And we have 20% of it coming out of our operating funds, which is about $2.1 million a year. I'm very proud of that, and I think that the district should be very proud of that. In addition to balancing the budget and doing some of these other things, we are still improving program. The Common Core Math and AVID program areas this year, we're adding staff. We're doing a lot of professional development. We're looking at technology, looking forward. So we are still continuing to move ahead, and this budget allows us to do that. If you just take our revenues, operating revenues and operating expenditures, we do have a $2.1 million surplus there, but again, we're using the $2.1 million to pay down long-term debt. Combined fund balances at the end of the year should remain at about $4.6 million, which will be about 5.6% of our revenues. That's, for us, it's a very strong position. We could actually operate the district with zero fund balance just because we defer our early taxes and we have strong cash positions. So we could still operate the district with zero fund balances. And we have a target of, or actually a benchmark of 3%. If we were to drop below 3%, it's my responsibility to bring an action plan to you, how we would get above that. So 3 is kind of our warning level, 3%. And technically, I know we could run with a zero fund balance and still operate the district. In terms of the key revenue items, revenue growth overall is expected to be 2.8%. Rod, I'll have you pop to the next chart. Thank you. It'll be, yeah, revenues, there we go. 2.8% overall growth, 3.4% of property taxes, 3% of that is the CPI, the cost of living increase, allowed by the tax caps. 0.4 of that property tax increase is new construction added. Kind of a low point for us. It's a very little growth in new growth, but that's just how it's been. And the economy's like that, and we've been kind of planning for these low years, so we're okay. Look, if you notice the interest, it was $149,000 last year. We're just going to plan on that being flat. I think we'll actually meet our interest goal this year just because we're driving it so low. In good years, the interest income has been $3 million in this district. So when we talk about how to, the future, maybe 5 years from now, 6 years from now, if things ever normalize for us, we should have available resources to do really great things in this district. And interest income will be one of those components that I believe will help us get to that level. And we are paying off our long-term debt without issuing any new debt, and that's a good thing too in terms of our taxpayers. The other local revenue, if you look at that big drop, it's 25% down. We did anticipate getting a final payout for a TIF that's in a relatively small TIF in Bolingbrook, but they have not closed the books on that yet. And I still do anticipate getting something from that, but we didn't budget it. We're not budgeting anything from that TIF, and we're going to leave it off the books. And if it comes in, it comes in. We don't even know an amount. They have not finalized the report to tell us what's available. Anything left at the end of a TIF, and it's been 23 years. it ran out, the time has run out, is supposed to be allocated and paid out to the taxing entities based on their relative tax rates. So we should get something from that, but we'll see how that works. And then if you hit expenditures for me, Rod, that'll be the next one. Expenditures overall, 2.6%. So again, not growing as fast as the revenues, which is a good overall sign. Salaries are up. That includes some new staff. We've also had some retirements. So this is all across the board, 2.5% average, including the additional salaries we've added, additional positions. Benefits, actually, the biggest concern for benefits last year, and again for next year, has been the IMRF fund. Unlike the teachers' retirement system, where the state itself, General Assembly, decides whether or not they want to fully fund that, which we clearly know they haven't for, I think, 60 or 70 years. I think it's been 2 times since 1936 that they've actually funded it at the actuarial level. IMRF is only supported by the employer and the employees. And so when investments go down, which these big pension funds have huge investment portfolios, when those returns go down, the employer's rate goes up. And so that's what's happening. We saw it go up actually from about 11.6% to 12.6% this last year. So that's gone up. Now, when the market, it has gone up, the market is much healthier now, but it'll take a lag. It'll catch up in the next year or two. That rate is typically in the 8 or 9% range. And so that rate should drop. But we're anticipating in this budget for that rate to stay the same or even grow a little bit, again, just as a safety precaution. So you're going to see, that's why the benefits are pushing up a little bit more there. And really, there's I guess the other positive thing is that the tuition expense. Worked very hard with Evan to try and identify all the students before he left, because it was really his responsibility to build the budget before he left. And we are seeing, first, some students age out or leaving the district. They're graduating from the district who are in special placements, and he has a number of them identified that are coming back into our programs, into the building. So we'll have fewer outside placements. So we should see a reduction in the tuition next year, which should also help our special ed tuition, transportation costs. Excuse me, not tuition, but transportation costs. So a lot of positives out of this budget, and we're excited about it. Now, if you flip one more up, there's one more exhibit. I usually don't get too deep into the non-operating funds and long-term debt, but it's been quite a while since we've talked about capital projects. And if you look at the second line of that top section, the capital project starts out with $1 million deficit, and the expenditure column there of $1.7 million, we've already paid a deposit on the Menard property. And we have a budget of about $1.8 million for the purchase and the renovations to that property. But we've already spent some money, like the deposit and some other costs with architectural preparation for this. So we expect to spend about $1.7 million for that project. And if you got to that section of the narrative, I'm sure you did, there's the discussion of the sub-funds. We have been carrying a deficit since actually 1990s. Well, I guess it was 2002, actually, when we started pulling a deficit in our old master facility plan. That was, we had an outside construction manager for that project. It went very, very poorly. There was a lot of litigation, hundreds of thousands of dollars in litigation. Because of that, ended up having a settlement with that individual or that firm. And on top of that, we had 78 different contractors, direct contracts with contractors, and everybody was pointing the finger at each other in this, between the architects and the construction manager and the contractors. And we ended up with over $5 million deficit in that fund when we started that. And feeling at that time was we still had a lot of, several litigations pending, or lawsuits pending with some of the trades. We were hoping to recover something from them, and we did. We recovered some from them. We also had, I guess with that, we some of them went bankrupt, which even though we won the court case, we didn't get any money back from them. And so the decision at that time was, rather than to use our operating funds to wipe out that over expenditure, we would just use a long-term strategy. And I still support this, and I think it's the right strategy. And it's very unusual, but it's been working for us. What was it, a $5.7 million deficit in 2003 is now about a $3.1 million deficit. And the way that we're working it down is interest income and other capital projects that we haven't taken any of the Woodridge property settlement. That's in a separate subfund, and we've allowed that interest to stay in there. But we've had other life safety projects and other things where the money would earn interest while it's sitting in there, and we would put that towards that deficit. There also is money in the debt service funds that was issued, well, let me do it this way. We issued $49.5 million worth of bonds. Each year, we have a debt service levy from the year that started in 1997 to 2017. We still have bonds outstanding. It's a 20-year deal. Each year, we levy out a debt service fund, and we have principal and interest money in that fund waiting to pay the principal and interest of the bondholders. But it earns interest at the same time. And the interest that's earned on those bonds, the money we're holding in that debt service fund, can be used to offset that deficit. And we actually have about $1.1 million in the debt service fund that we could apply to the $3 million or so that's still outstanding in that deficit. So the net deficit is about $2 million, and we still have until 2017 to continue to work it down. One little piece of there is that we can't transfer that interest out of the debt service until all the bondholders have been paid off, and that's all done. And when that's in 2017, when that's done, we can transfer whatever interest is accumulated in that fund to help wipe this out. And we don't have to impair our operating funds. And that was a decision at the time. We could just take it out of the operating funds and wipe it out, but we also have this other long-standing revenue source that's coming in that we could also use. And so that was the decision back in 2003 that we would do that. And if Julie's not here, I think Julie would have been the only board member who would have been present at the time with that board when that was decided. But if you look at the past exhibits, there sometimes are negative amounts sitting there for capital projects. It's because we have about $2 million left in the Woodridge property, the master site plan sub-account, but we have a $3 million deficit in the master facility plan sitting there. That's why we have a net $1 million. And when we spend down the another $1.7 million of the Woodridge property, we'll have about $2.7 million deficit sitting in this fund net. Okay, but we've never gone to the extent to explain all this. But now it's kind of coming out a little bit more because we've almost always had some other capital project fund sitting in there, which is been covering that. So I wanted you to see that because I didn't want, you're going to see it in the tentative budget. It's been out there. And we've had a deficit for this line item in the past, but there's no big money coming in. We're not going to issue any bonds. We don't anticipate the next few years. And so it's going to sit there for another 5 years or so. Bottom section of this exhibit is a long-term debt, and I just broke it out there because, and I like hammering it home, about 20% of our long-term debt is being paid for out of operating funds. We get about $1.5 million in the principal maturities this year, so, and about $2.1 million overall with principal and interest. So it's just a real positive thing for the district. And that's it. I know that was a complicated piece there, but that's why I tried to write it up in the narrative part. Maybe it'll help follow that a little bit better, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
I have one with regard to contingencies. So both looking at the year-end report and proposed budget. We had in the last year's budget total of $950,000 contingency. This year $1 million proposed. We had, for lack of a better description, shortfall last year, 985, 748. How does that relate? Is it fair to say that the contingency covered that, or how am I not looking at contingency in the correct way?
Well, no, you are. The contingency, we have $1 million of revenue contingency and $1 million expenditure contingency. And the additional 50,000 this year is in the IMRF fund just because it's been so volatile with that rate. So I put another $50,000 into the IMRF fund this year. And actually, if you look at the total legal budget, there was another $500,000 contingency in the capital project fund, which wasn't part of the operating group. Then I've reduced that down to $300,000, just because there's so much less activity going through there this year. But we already knew we were going to have $400,000 shortfall.
Plumbing.
So that really wasn't a contingency, didn't need to be covered by contingency because it was already budgeted.
Got it.
But the extra $1 million contingency that we had really covered overall. I'm going to make a clarification in a minute. Overall, the $1 million contingency we had last year covered the expenditure overage of $380,000 this year. But there's two things. One is that it might not have covered it individually on every fund. And the downfall to that is that we'll note that in our financial statements, but it doesn't really hurt us. We're not breaking the law. It's just going to be noted. It means the auditors will put that in the footnotes that it was overexpended. And second, when we make the adjustments to go to the modified accrual basis, there's going to be a lot of swing with accounts payable and different pieces. So the numbers we're looking at on the cash basis really don't get compared to the budget. It's the true modified accrual audited financials that are matched up against that budget to see where we are on an individual fund basis. And one thing that was a little bit, I think, put a little more pressure on it this year is that our school year ended another week earlier, and so there's more time for vendors to get their bills in, so we might have actually just paid more bills in June. And then when we really sort out the payables, we'll be okay, I think. And also, there's a few more big adjustments that we just let go. The health benefit fund, even though it's a separate trust type of fund for us, it's grown by $500,000 this year. That actually will come back into the educational fund and reduce the expenditures in that fund, like that extra $500,000, because it's reported with the educational fund. So if that separate fund grows, it actually helps us. It offsets some expenditures because generally accepted accounting principles wants that self-insurance fund to be part of the educational fund. But we keep it as a separate sub-fund, so to speak, anyways. So I think when we get to the final audited figures, we'll be in fine shape, we'll be okay. And there was some tweaking of the contingencies this year. I think for the last 8 years, I haven't changed them, but I did increase IMRF a little bit this year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Capital projects?
Mr. Collegier, brief update on work this summer?
Okay, projects are going well. We've not had any really unanticipated costs to any of the projects, so they're all within budget. I'll start with the lighting for North and South campuses, the LED lighting. Actually, today was at North High School, they started installing them. Half of the fixtures are in. They'll finish by the end of this week at North High School, then head over to South and start installing there and complete there by August 9th. So the project's going well with the LED. We also have applied for, or started the process of applying for the DCEO grant. Looking forward to getting possibly some monies back with the grant. The air handlers at North are in. All that's left is the controls. That'll be this week, so that project will be completed by Friday. The parking lot at South High School is done and lined. We're just doing some modifications to the stairway, the entryway going into the dock area. Library carpet at South is installed. The circulation desk is being reconfigured. They're working at that right now, so everything's going well with the project. Should be done within a week. The lockers at South High School did have a delay in the delivery of these new lockers. They're expected in this week sometime, and as soon as they get here, they'll be installed immediately. So we're running behind. The project was due up to be completed July 12th, so we're running a little behind on that one. We're working with South and their athletic director, and we're going to be able to still get this in this summer and get ready to go for fall season. The resilient floor at South High School is in. We just have to line it. That'll be a 2-day process starting July 29th. Loading dock roof at North High School. The roof is on, just need to do some flashing. They're also finishing the canopy that has begun, should be done by the end of this week. Closed circuit TV, CCTV at South, 13 cameras, 12 indoor, 1 outdoor. They're all in, they're just booting it up on the security software at the school. Painting at South starts tomorrow, and it'll continue to August 9th. Last but not least, or second to the last, the flooring project at North High School, now that the LED lighting will be in and the air handlers will be completed by Friday. Monday, the flooring people will come in for a 3-week process to refinish the floor. And South High School pool lap tank, we are tearing it off right now and going to determine and evaluate the conditions and then replaster. So looking to complete that project August 17th. I know I went through it quick, but if you have questions, feel free, I'll answer.
The pool lap tank at South, once you got I think you were scheduled this week to get get some of that plaster off, see what was happening behind.
One of the things, couple things we found already, as we started removing, it just kept going. The more we removed, the more came off. A couple of years back, we took the lighting out of the lap tank and filled the holes. You can basically go in there and pull out the substance that's in there. I think that was part of the problem. So we've refilled those holes. But I think it's going to be a full replaster at South High School, because as they started tearing it, it just keeps going. And I'd hate to do part of it and then come back a year from now and redo the rest. But that's the way it's looking right now.
So we don't have any recourse then to the manufacturer, because it could be our fault.
From Maverick, who installed it 7 years ago? No, we don't.
Jim, the building security system that's at South, does that allow us to, is there some person that kind of mans that? Is that like almost like a live camera type system, or no?
It is. Let me interrupt. The people in the building, there'll be administration that has access to it. The police liaison officer for South High School would have access to it.
So it can be monitored live?
It could be monitored live, yes.
You go in the police resource officer or liaison officer's office, you can see that.
Right,
That's-
and we're just adding more cameras then, right, to our existing ones that we already have?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
And this puts South High School and North High School, I believe, at 48 cameras, so they're very similar to the amount of cameras that are installed in their buildings now. It's kind of the last phase for South.
Questions? Freedom of information?
Had one Freedom of Information Act request this past month, Dr. Kupka, and that was fulfilled by Mr. Staley.
Okay, any other questions or thoughts before we move on to the consent agenda? Okay, I know we have a few modifications to the consent agenda prior to voting on it.
Yes, Dr. Kupka, I'd like to remove or pull out the closed session minutes section of the consent agenda, and I guess
Revisit
configure
that?
it or whatever, and we can put back in that the closed session minutes will be closed, but the length of time for them to be,
Retained?
yes,
Is still under discussion.
can be revisited next month.
Point of clarification there, I think the issue was we had both the minutes and then the recorded, the verbatim recordings. And we wanted to separate those two issues apart. And the verbatim recordings were something that
That's
we're
what
going
I
to
said.
continue to talk about.
Right.
Howard, can I ask a clarification question?
Yes, sir.
We take an item out of the consent agenda, and we modify that item as an agenda item.
And put it back?
Do we put it back in, or we vote it on it
I
outside
would
the
say you
consent agenda?
vote outside of the consent agenda.
That's my recollection, too.
Okay.
Okay. And that's fine.
So then, point of clarification, you're removing letter D from the consent agenda.
Correct.
Yes.
To clarify.
Okay, and we had another
Yeah,
modification?
I would also ask that item C be removed, resolution authorizing intervention in proceedings before Illinois Property Tax Appeal Board.
And that'll come back in the future for further discussion.
Yes, I'd like us to consider it outside of the consent agenda.
Okay. So I think what we first need is a recommendation to approve the consent agenda
Motion.
minus, a motion, thank you, minus subject C and D. Is that correct? Do we hear such a motion?
I'll move that we approve the consent agenda, items A and B minus items C and D.
Okay,
Second.
Mike Davenport moves, Keith Mattoon seconds.
Oh, okay.
Mike Davenport.
Aye.
Keith Mattoon.
Aye.
Terry Pavasich.
Aye.
Rick Pavanato.
Aye.
Deb Boyle.
Aye.
Nancy Kupka.
Aye. So it's carried. So now do we need to vote about bringing C back?
Yeah, you can talk.
I think then, now we discuss C as an agenda
As an
item.
agenda item.
I think you need a motion first before you discuss, don't you?
Well, I think we need, I presume we need, well,
We do need a motion before we discuss.
Okay.
okay.
Well, I would move that we, this is concerning the resolution authorizing intervention in proceedings before the State of Illinois Property Tax Appeal Board. And I would actually move that we move forward with this motion as presented, except that, that this approval for legal representation would only apply to the matter at hand and not for future possible matters.
Second.
Any discussion?
Rationale.
Want to call vote?
Mike Davenport.
Aye.
Keith Mattoon.
Aye.
Terry Pavasich.
Aye.
Rick Pavanato.
Aye.
Deb Boyle.
Aye.
Nancy Kupka.
Aye. It's carried. Subject D, closed session minutes.
Yes, I'd like to move that we separate the two items, the verbatim, or the written minutes versus the taped minutes. And that we keep the taped, or the recorded minutes, and then we will discuss later on the recorded minutes.
So you're
On
moving.
what we want to do with them.
So you're moving that we keep the minutes closed,
Yes.
but we discuss in the future about the duration of maintenance
What
of
we
the
do with
verbatim
the
tapes.
recorded
And we
minutes.
table the duration.
Okay.
Second.
So move, second. Want to call the vote?
Terry Pavasich.
Aye.
Keith Mattoon.
Aye.
Rick Pavanato.
Aye.
Deb Boyle.
Aye.
Mike Davenport.
Aye.
Nancy Kupka.
Aye. So carried. Thank you. Moving on to recommendations for action, the approval of the tentative budget.
Staley?
Well, have the tentative budget, it'll be posted at the schools, not posted, it'll be on the website, there'll be copies at the schools, also be in the libraries. It's required that it's out for 30 days, and at our August meeting, we'll have a budget hearing, an opportunity for community members, if anybody's seen it and wants to comment on it or address the board at that time, we would have it available for them. And you had mentioned one item that might have been confusing, and that is at the, in the exchange we had earlier, that the August meeting, we'll have a projection, a 5-year projection. I didn't mention that when I talked about the tentative budget earlier. And really, that's the point when we are looking for anything that's not already built into the strategic plan for any changes, any strategic changes in the budget. I mean, we start the building process really as soon after we get the 5-year projection in place, and it's kind of a long lead time for many things we do, contractual changes, all that. So we would be looking at the August meeting for anything that would now already be in the strategic plan from the members of the community and the board.
And so we would contact you directly?
Well, I think at the board meeting, I think it's probably best to have it, I think it needs to be a board directive if we're going to do anything major. We never really have had that, but I'm just saying that's the opportunity to address those things, because then we have time to go through the whole budget process with looking at options for those changes, how to implement those changes, if it needs a restructuring of a contract, different things like that, so.
Thank you. Any questions?
I move that we accept the tentative budget for 2013-2014 for display purposes and establish 7:45 PM August 19th, 2013 in the Administrative Service Center Community Room for the public hearing.
Thank you, Meg Davenport.
Second.
Terry Pavasich seconds. Could you please call the roll?
Mike Davenport.
Aye.
Terry Pavasich.
Aye.
Rick Pavanato.
Aye.
Deb Boyle.
Aye.
Keith Mattoon.
Aye.
Itzi Kupka.
Aye. Is there any old business we've missed?
Yes, there is, actually. I've been in contact with Dr. Bilatia, who's been a consultant for the board for the previous 4 years, I believe, about orchestrating or facilitating the superintendent evaluation. Dr. Atia gave me 3 dates that he would be available: August 5th, August 26th, and September 9th. I believe these are all Monday nights. And my hope is that we can find one of those dates when the entire board can be available for this purpose. It's probably a regular, it'd be a 3-hour session, probably with dinner prior.
Okay. So can we have Joanne send out an email?
We can, but we need to move on this sooner than later. So we can send out an email, but we would request that you check your calendars this week and see what dates would work.
Questions, discussion?
Could some dates be proposed?
August 5th,
Fifth,
August 26th, and September 9th.
Sorry.
That's okay.
August 5th,
August 26th
26th,
and September 9th.
September 9th.
Those are all Monday evenings.
This was,
Okay, so let's all get back to Joanne
ASAP.
ASAP. Any other old business?
There is none.
Okay, second reception of visitors. This is the opportunity for anybody to address the board on any subject. Hearing none, we'll go forward to communications and announcements. Keith, do you have a report online?
There's no report. We are adjourned for the summer.
Great. I know Julia is not here today to talk about CSD Communities Council. Terry, did you have anything from?
No, I'm sorry,
Either from
I don't have anything on SACIT, and I don't have anything on the foundation. We did not meet this month.
Okay. Go ahead.
But for IASB, which wasn't on there, and I see Joanne was nice enough to put our IASB conference that's coming up, and I thank you for that, and I hope everybody got back to Joanne about attending the conference, of which, just for the general public, it's November 22nd through the 24th, and it is the annual IASB conference, which is something that I think most of the board members here definitely like to take advantage of, because it is a learning tool for us. It enhances what we bring to the board. We learn a lot of new ideas that we bring back to the school district, and it just definitely enhances our learning about many subjects across the board when it addresses school districts. It is also happens to be the 100th anniversary this year of IASB, so it's going to be, I think, kind of a neat conference to be at. I would stress to everybody to look in the newsletter, because there are some proposed resolutions. There's about 20 of them right now, of which I'll get back to everybody about. They'll usually come out with a nice little packet, and we'll look over. Since I'm the delegate to the IASB board, I'll be voting on those resolutions. So we'll talk about those at a later date, and then you can give me some guidance as to how we would like to vote on those as a group. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. And it is an exciting time to be a delegate. I just have one question. Is the policy committee meeting at any time soon?
Yes,
Okay.
but we have not yet
Said anything yet.
finalized the date, but we are going to meet anytime soon.
Okay, anybody else, anything else to bring up?
If I could, dates we were talking about for Mr. Attia. September 9th, you threw out?
Yes.
That's already a night we've got scheduled for a workshop?
I know that, but we've done that in the past. If
Okay, so-
that push comes to shove, we've
That's what we
we've
could
done
do.
that.
All right, okay. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions, or discussion? Okay, upcoming board meeting. Our next meeting will be August 19th, 7:30, here at the ASC. We need a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.